On the 2nd of July, 2026, somewhere in the Norwegian Sea, F-35Bs from HMS Prince of Wales broke from the carrier's flight pattern and climbed hard to intercept a Russian Tu-142 Bear-F maritime patrol aircraft. The aircraft had already dropped 10 sonobuoys close to the carrier during NATO Operation Firecrest, probing for the ship's acoustic signature, mapping her escort screen, announcing its presence in the most deliberate way short of a hostile act. NATO confirmed it was the first time air policing had ever been conducted from a European aircraft carrier. The Royal Navy was operating in contested northern waters, and the sky around its flagship was not empty. It has been this way before. 86 years earlier, a British carrier operated in those same latitudes with hostile aircraft overhead, hostile submarines beneath, and an enemy willing to use both without warning. That carrier was HMS Ark Royal. What she endured off Norway in 1940 shaped everything the Royal Navy came to understand about the survival of a carrier in a hostile maritime environment. And the lessons written in her service record, and eventually in her loss, still echo in every scramble launched from a modern British deck. April 1940. The Norwegian campaign was 11 days old and already collapsing around the edges. Germany had seized Oslo, Bergen, Trondheim, and Narvik in a single coordinated operation on the 9th of April, moving faster than any Allied response could match. The Royal Navy found itself operating in fjords and coastal approaches where the water was deep enough to hide submarines, the terrain channeled aircraft onto predictable attack vectors, and shore-based Luftwaffe units flying from captured Norwegian airfields could reach any British ship within range of the coast. There was no friendly air cover from land. The only fighter aircraft available to the fleet were the ones flying from British carrier decks. Ark Royal had been commissioned on the 16th of December, 1938 at Cammell Laird's yard in Birkenhead, handed to her first commanding officer, Captain Arthur Power, just weeks before. She had cost the nation over £3 million, equivalent to roughly £240 million in today's money, making her the most expensive non-battleship ever ordered by the Royal Navy at that time. She displaced 27,525 long tons at deep load, her 3 Parsons-geared turbines driving 3 propellers of 16 feet in diameter and delivering a maximum speed of 31.2 knots, achieved during trials in May 1938 at 103,012 shaft horsepower. She was fast, capable, and new. She was also operating in waters purpose-made to kill her. On paper, the Luftwaffe held every significant advantage over a carrier operating in the Norwegian theatre. Shore-based bombers flying from captured Norwegian fields did not have to find their target through open ocean, they knew where the fleet would be, because the fleet had to be where the army needed it. The Junkers Ju-88, the primary threat, was faster than anything Ark Royal could put in the air as a fighter, capable of speeds above 290 miles per hour compared to the Blackburn Skuas' top speed of 225 miles per hour. The Skua, Ark Royal's frontline fighter and dive bomber in the Norwegian period, had been designed to a 1934 specification combining the fighter and dive bomber role, and the compromise showed. At 8,300 pounds gross weight against the Spitfire's 5,900 pounds, it climbed slowly and turned heavily. On paper, a fleet carrier operating under Luftwaffe air superiority in a confined coastal theatre was a target, not an asset. On paper, the only question was when she would be hit, not whether. And yet Ark Royal's designers had made choices that are worth understanding carefully, because those choices determined how the ship survived the first year of the war when other carriers did not. The fundamental design decision was structural. Ark Royal was the first Royal Navy carrier in which the flight deck and hangars formed an integral part of the hull girder itself, rather than being built as a superstructure addition above it. Her flight deck, 800 feet long, rising 66 feet above the waterline, was the ship's strength deck, constructed from ducal steel plating 3/4 of an inch thick. The 2 hangar decks were enclosed within the hull, which gave them a degree of splinter protection that earlier British carriers simply did not have. The machinery spaces sat behind for 0.5-inch belt armor. To conserve displacement within treaty limits, the London Naval Treaty had capped carriers at 23,000 long tons, a limit Ark Royal was designed around. 65% of her hull was welded rather than riveted, saving 500 long tons compared to a conventionally assembled hull. Her torpedo protection was engineered to a specific threat standard, a void-liquid void 3-layer side protection system, the same scheme used on the King George V-class battleships, calculated to absorb a warhead of up to 750 pounds. Her anti-aircraft armament reflected a design philosophy that assumed aircraft, not enemy surface ships, would be the primary threat. 16 quick-firing 4.5-inch dual-purpose guns in 8 twin turrets, controlled by 4 directors running the high-angle control system, gave her a directed, radar-assisted anti-aircraft capability that was genuinely modern for the period. 6 8-barrel 2-pounder pom-pom guns sat on the flight deck itself, forward and aft of the island, supplemented by 8 4-barreled half-inch machine gun platforms at the deck edges. Speed, in the final calculation, was her most important protection against anything that fire control could not handle. At over 31 knots she could break from an escort screen, turn into the wind for flight operations, and accelerate away from surface threats no destroyer could outrun. Ark Royal carried between 50 and 60 aircraft in practice, across 2 hangar decks served by 3 lifts, against a design capacity of 72 that was never met because the aircraft delivered during construction were larger and heavier than the 1934 specification had anticipated. At the time of the Norwegian campaign, her air groups flew Blackburn Skuas in a combined fighter and dive bomber role, and Fairey Swordfish for torpedo attack, anti-submarine work, and reconnaissance. From April 1940, Skua-equipped squadrons began converting to the Fairey Fulmar. 16 Fleet Air Arm squadrons rotated through the ship across her career, with an average of 5 embarked at any one time. This was the ship that went north in 1940. Not invincible, the absence of an armoured flight deck was a conscious traitor-driven compromise, but more capable of absorbing punishment and continuing to operate than almost anything the Admiralty could have sent. She had already demonstrated her instinct for survival. On the 14th of September, 1939, UE-39 had launched 2 torpedoes at her from close range. Lookout spotted the tracks, the carrier turned into the attack to reduce her cross-section, and both weapons exploded astern. The German crew scuttled UE-39 as she was forced to the surface by depth-charging F-class destroyers, the first U-boat lost in the war. On the 26th of September, a Junkers Ju-88 of Luftwaffe bomber wing kilogram 30 had placed a 2,200-pound bomb within 100 feet of her starboard bow, close enough to send water cascading over the deck, after she had heeled hard to starboard to spoil the drop. The Germans, unable to see whether the carrier had been hit, declared her sunk. Churchill personally invited the American naval attaché to inspect her in dock and cabled Roosevelt to confirm she was undamaged. She was a ship that the enemy kept failing to kill. If accounts like this one matter to you, the ships that kept surviving when they had no right to, and the design decisions that made the difference, then subscribing to this channel is the simplest way to be here for the next one. The Norwegian campaign brought Ark Royal into the most sustained and concentrated test of her career to that point. Skuas from her air groups operated at the edge of their combat radius across operations that ranged from fleet fighter defense to strike missions against German shipping in the fjords. On the 10th of April, 1940, 16 Skuas from 800 and 803 naval air squadrons, though flying from the shore base at Renneshatstun in the Orkney Islands rather than from the carrier, made a 330-mile night flight to Bergen and sank the German cruiser Königsberg with direct bomb hits at dawn. It was the first major warship ever sunk in war by air attack, a fact that the Admiralty noted with considerable attention. The Skua had proven that carrier-borne aircraft could kill capital ships when flown with precision and commitment. But the carrier herself remained the primary target, and the pressure was relentless. The Luftwaffe had grasped early that eliminating British carrier air power over Norway would remove the only serious obstacle to German air superiority over the fleet. Ark Royal operated within range of shore-based German bombers throughout the campaign. Her air commander's response to the first sighting by enemy reconnaissance, documented as early as September 1939 in the incident with the Dornier Do-18 seaplanes, was already a practiced drill, aircraft secured below, anti-aircraft weapons manned, the ship turning hard to complicate the bombing solution. She turned toward incoming torpedoes to reduce her presented waterline, and turned hard to starboard or port to ruin a level bombing run. Those maneuvers required speed, and Ark Royal had it. She was operating in a theater that also demanded Swordfish crews fly anti-submarine patrols and reconnaissance missions in weather that the Swordfish's open cockpit made genuinely brutal, at low altitude over terrain where a forced landing meant a fjord or a mountainside. For many aircrew aboard Ark Royal during the Norwegian operations, these were their first combat missions, their first night recoveries onto a moving deck in northern waters. The cost of this period was not paid by Ark Royal herself. It was paid, ultimately, by HMS Glorious. Caught without her aircraft ranged for defense on the 8th of June, 1940, the carrier was intercepted by the German battlecruisers Starnhorst and Neisner and sunk with a loss of over 1,500 men. Ark Royal was elsewhere. The Norwegian campaign ended in evacuation. The carrier that had been the fleet's shield through those weeks withdrew south, carrying the knowledge of what happened when a carrier was caught unprepared and undefended in hostile waters. Ark Royal continued fighting. She was involved in the attack on the French fleet at Mers-el-Kebir in July 1940, where 12 Swordfish from 810 and 820 Naval Air Squadrons launched 3 torpedo sorties against the anchored French battleships. She hunted the Admiral Graf Spee in the South Atlantic. Swordfish from her decks played a decisive role in slowing the Bismarck during May 1941, their torpedo attacks contributing to the damage that prevented the German battleship from reaching St. Nazaire. Then, on the 13th of November, 1941, operating in the western Mediterranean 30 miles east of Gibraltar, she was hit by a single torpedo from U-81. One man was killed in the strike itself. Despite efforts to save the ship and tow her to Gibraltar, she sank the following day. Only one of her 1,488 crew was lost in total, a remarkably low casualty figure given the scale of the sinking, but the ship was gone. Subsequent inquiries found design flaws in her damage control arrangements, particularly in the vulnerability of her boiler and engine room spaces to flooding after a single torpedo hit, and these findings were incorporated into the design of subsequent British carriers. Her wreck was located in December 2002 by an American survey company under contract to the BBC, at a depth of approximately 3,300 feet, some 30 nautical miles from Gibraltar. She did not sink off Norway. She did not sink at Mers-el-Kebir or in the Atlantic. She was not the carrier that Kilogram 30's Junkers Ju-88 destroyed with that 2,200-pound bomb in September 1939, though Berlin said otherwise. She absorbed 2 years and 2 months of the war's most demanding carrier operations before a single torpedo finally held her. The Norwegian Sea has not changed its character. It is still deep, still cold, still contested, and still a place where the survival of a carrier depends on whether her aircraft are in the air before the threat completes its run. On the 2nd of July, 2026, F-35Bs from HMS Prince of Wales were airborne and on intercept before that Tu-142 finished dropping its sonobuoys. The geometry of the threat has changed entirely, the aircraft faster, the sensors more precise, the geometry of detection measured in hundreds of miles rather than visual range. But the fundamental calculation is the same one Ark Royal's commanders made every day off Norway in 1940. The carrier survives because her aircraft are flying, and they are flying because someone prepared for exactly this. Nobody called Ark Royal lucky who had watched her fly her aircraft in those waters and bring them home. Luck was the word used by people who had not seen the preparation. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to be here when we cover the next ship, please subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story is already waiting.